The dry winds howled through the canyon as Jack trudged along the rocky terrain, his toolkit swinging heavily at his side. He squinted into the glare of the twin suns, cursing the dust that clung to his jumpsuit. Another day, another busted mining rig. Life on this colony was as unremarkable as the rocks it dug up. Jack knew he was wasting his talents here. An engineer with a knack for fixing anything mechanical, stuck patching up rusty equipment that wasn't worth the parts it was built from. The sharp crack of metal against stone pulled him out of his brooding. At the bottom of the ravine, a glint caught his eye. Jack hesitated, shading his face with his hand. The shape was too smooth, too symmetrical to be another boulder. Intrigued, he slid down the embankment, boots skidding on loose gravel until he landed near the object. He crouched, brushing away layers of sand to reveal a surface that shimmered faintly like polished obsidian. This wasn't human-made. Jack's breath quickened as he ran his fingers over the material, marveling at how it seemed to hum faintly under his touch. His heart raced, not just with excitement, but with the nagging sense that this was a discovery someone else might not want him to make. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw nothing but endless canyon walls. Still, he reached for his multi-tool and pried open a barely visible seam. The panel gave way with a hiss, revealing a tangled mess of conduits and what looked like veins pulsating with dim light. He blinked, momentarily stunned. This was no ordinary alien relic. It was alive, or something close to it. He leaned closer, his mind racing to decipher what he was looking at. The circuitry seemed to pulse in response to his presence, as if acknowledging him. Of all the things, he muttered, shaking his head. The practical part of him urged caution. This thing, whatever it was, could be dangerous. But the mechanic in him, the part that couldn't resist a challenge, won out. Jack spent the next few hours lost in a haze of exploration, carefully dismantling and reassembling components. His toolbox quickly became a cluttered mess of wires, bolts, and unfamiliar shards of glowing material. He'd never seen technology like this before. It was intuitive yet incomprehensible, as though it had been designed for hands that weren't his. As he worked, strange things began to happen. The air grew heavy, almost charged, and faint whispers seemed to echo from within the ship's core. Jack told himself it was just his imagination, but a prickle of unease crept up his spine. Still, he pressed on, driven by a mixture of curiosity and stubborn pride. He connected a power cell from his portable generator to a partially exposed node, watching as a surge of energy coursed through the structure. Lights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the canyon walls. Then came the growl. Low and guttural, it vibrated through the air, freezing Jack in place. He spun around, scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. The sound seemed to emanate from inside the ship. He hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to leave, but his hands betrayed him, reaching for the next connection point instead. He wasn't about to let fear rob him of a breakthrough. Another growl, louder this time, echoed through the canyon, and the ground beneath him trembled. Jack stumbled back, heart pounding, as a section of the ship's hull shifted, revealing an opening. Inside, the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, coiling and uncoiling like living smoke. Jack tightened his grip on his wrench, the closest thing he had to a weapon, and stepped cautiously toward the opening. The interior was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The walls pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of some slumbering beast, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone. In the center of the chamber lay what looked like a large pod, its surface cracked and covered in a layer of frost. Jack's breath fogged as he approached, the temperature dropping sharply. He wiped away the frost with his sleeve, revealing a translucent surface beneath. Inside the pod was something alive. Its form was vaguely canine, but larger, with sinewy limbs and a coat that shimmered like liquid silver. Its eyes were closed, but even in sleep, its presence was commanding. Jack's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a ship. It was a prison or maybe a tomb. He backed away, his mind racing. Whatever this creature was, it had been here for a long time, forgotten and left to decay along with the ship. But the ship wasn't entirely dead. Somehow, his tinkering had sparked something, a reaction, a revival. He looked back at the pod, watching as the cracks began to spread across its surface. The growling returned, louder and more insistent. This time, it wasn't coming from the ship, it was coming from the creature. Jack turned and ran, scrambling out of the chamber and back toward the canyon floor. Behind him, the sound of shattering glass and a bone-deep roar echoed through the air. He didn't look back. Not yet. He reached his equipment and whirled around, chest heaving, expecting to see the creature charging after him. Instead, there was silence. The ship stood motionless, its lights dimmed, and the canyon was still, save for the wind that tugged at Jack's clothes. For a moment, he wondered if he'd imagined it all. But deep down, he knew better. He stared at the ship, his mind torn between two conflicting thoughts. He could walk away, leave whatever he'd awakened to its fate, and never speak of this again. Or he could go back, face the unknown, and uncover the truth about the ship and its enigmatic occupant. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow and tightened his grip on the wrench. There was no question, really. He wasn't the kind of man to leave a puzzle unsolved, even if it meant risking everything. Taking a deep breath, he stepped toward the ship, ready to finish what he'd started. Jack's pulse hammered in his chest as he approached the ship again. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was alive inside. Despite his better judgment, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Not now. His fingers trembled as he gripped the ship's exterior, feeling the hum beneath the surface. The energy was different this time, more intense, as though the ship had become aware of his presence. With a deep breath, he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. He reached for the panel he had exposed earlier, knowing he would need to continue the repairs if he had any hope of understanding what was inside. The ship's systems had come to life in a strange, chaotic burst earlier, but Jack had been too distracted by the growling and the overwhelming sense of danger to really make sense of it. He tried to push the fear out of his mind. If he was going to do this, he had to be calm. He reattached the makeshift cables he had used to power the ship's core, hoping that somehow he could get a better read on the internal systems. But as he connected the final wire, something shifted inside the ship. There was a loud, crackling noise that rattled the hull, followed by a soft mechanical whir. Then, the pod, the one holding the strange, silver wolf-like creature, began to stir. Jack froze, the wrench in his hand clattering to the ground. The growl came again, low and guttural. But this time, it wasn't a warning. The creature's eyes opened slowly, and Jack could see them clearly for the first time. Pale, luminous orbs that seemed to pierce right through him. His breath caught in his throat. It was alive. It was watching him. It took Jack a moment to gather his thoughts. His hand instinctively reached for his tool belt, but he wasn't sure what he could possibly do with a wrench against something like this. The creature shifted within its pod, making the entire ship tremble as it rose, its form stretching and flexing like it had been coiled for centuries. The wolf's massive body seemed to ripple with power beneath its silver fur. Despite its terrifying presence, Jack felt an inexplicable pull, an almost primal recognition. He wasn't sure why, but he knew this creature wasn't just a beast. It was something more. Slowly, he backed away, trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. But the wolf didn't lunge. It didn't charge. Instead, it tilted its head, studying Jack with an unnerving intelligence. The growls had stopped. A tense silence filled the air as the creature remained still, eyeing him as though measuring his very soul. Jack found his voice. "Easy there? I'm not going to hurt you." The words felt absurd, hanging in the air between them like a desperate plea. To his surprise, the creature didn't respond with more aggression. Instead, it blinked slowly, almost lazily. It was as if it were processing his presence, deciding whether or not he was a threat. The longer Jack looked into those glowing eyes, the more unsettled he became. This was no ordinary animal, no mindless beast. The wolf exuded an intelligence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. A sudden movement caught his attention. The wolf's tail flicked, then raised, as if in a silent command. And to Jack's astonishment, the creature staggered out of its pod, its limbs moving with a fluid, almost graceful precision. It took a few hesitant steps forward, its massive frame filling the chamber with its imposing presence. The air seemed to thrum around it, as if responding to the wolf's energy. Jack instinctively took a step back, his eyes never leaving the creature. The wolf's mouth parted slightly, and a low, melodic sound emanated from its throat. It was like a hum, almost a language. Jack couldn't understand it, but the tone was unmistakably communicative. And in that moment, something in the way it looked at him clicked. This wasn't an animal. It was a guardian, perhaps, or a protector. Jack swallowed hard. "You want me to help you?" The wolf's glowing eyes flickered. A flash of recognition sparked between them, and for a brief, surreal moment, Jack felt as though the creature was speaking to him without words. He didn't understand it, but he felt the weight of it, like a burden shared. The air between them seemed to crackle with an unseen connection. He hesitated for only a heartbeat before he made up his mind. "All right," he muttered, "let's get you out of here." The ship responded to his actions as if it recognized Jack's intent. The walls hummed softly, and Jack felt a jolt of electricity surge through the ship's interior. The energy seemed to pulse in sync with the wolf's movements, as though the creature itself was somehow attuned to the ship's systems. Jack didn't have much time to dwell on this strange synchronicity as he hurried to one of the nearby consoles, flipping switches and pulling levers. He had no idea what he was doing, but he felt a gut-deep sense of urgency. As the creature moved closer to him, Jack noticed the damage it had sustained. Its fur was matted in places, and several of its limbs were weak, as though it had been lying dormant for far too long. The wolf's movements were slow, pained, but there was still a quiet power in them. Jack's heart twisted with a mix of sympathy and awe. What had happened to this creature? What had it endured? Jack set to work, trying to reroute power to various systems, hoping that the wolf's presence was somehow triggering something vital in the ship's core. The air grew heavier, and a strange, warm light began to pulse from within the ship. Jack glanced over his shoulder at the creature, who was watching him with an intensity that made him feel both small and significant. For the first time since he'd arrived on the ship, Jack felt like he wasn't alone. He wasn't just repairing an old, forgotten vessel. He was in the presence of something ancient, something powerful, and he had no idea how far-reaching the consequences of his actions would be. But one thing was certain: whatever was happening here, Jack was a part of it now. The wolf, the ship, it was all bound together in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. And despite the danger that still lingered, Jack knew one thing with absolute certainty: there was no turning back. The low hum of the ship's core vibrated beneath Jack's feet as he and the wolf moved through the darkened halls. The ship was alive now. There was no other word for it. The strange hum, once an eerie background noise, had become a constant presence, pulsing in rhythm with their movements. The air seemed charged, as though the ship's very walls were waiting for something. The wolf had taken the lead, moving with a surety Jack couldn't quite fathom. Despite its earlier injuries, it had a purpose now, and Jack felt drawn to it. Something had shifted. He wasn't just fixing the ship anymore. He was unlocking its secrets. But there was no time to dwell on the eerie quiet. Jack's mind raced as the ship's internal systems slowly came online, piece by piece. The displays flickered to life, casting a faint blue glow on the walls as he worked, tapping at consoles with increasing urgency. They had little time. The more the ship awakened, the more Jack could feel the danger closing in. Back at the mining colony, something was wrong. He'd felt at the moment he'd started fixing the ship, an odd sensation, like eyes watching him. It wasn't just paranoia. The mining overseers were no strangers to exploiting valuable technology, and an alien ship was a treasure they'd kill for. If they discovered what Jack had found, it wouldn't just be a matter of turning over the ship. It would be a matter of silencing the man who'd found it. He was already too deep in. The wolf paused as if it heard Jack's thoughts, its glowing eyes turning toward him. It seemed to sense the growing threat, its ears flicking toward the entrance of the ship. The beast's nostrils flared, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw the faintest hint of a snarl curling its lips. There was something protective about its posture now, something fierce. Jack swallowed, steeling himself. "We need to move, big guy," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Without warning, the wolf padded forward, its pace quickening as the ship's doors slid open in response. Jack followed closely, his heart hammering in his chest. The outer air of the canyon met them with a gust of wind as they emerged into the open, the ship's metallic exterior gleaming under the harsh light of the twin suns. Jack's eyes darted around the barren landscape, knowing that the ship wasn't the only thing drawing attention. The colony's security forces were on high alert. He could feel it. They were out there. He had to get the ship into the air. Inside the ship, Jack had discovered a control room, a darkened chamber lined with glowing symbols, some of which he was able to identify through his intuition, others which were completely alien. As he approached the central console, the wolf stepped to the side, its keen eyes scanning the horizon like a sentry. Jack quickly ran through the command sequences, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. Nothing was easy about it. Some of the systems were completely inaccessible, their data corrupted by years of disrepair. But Jack didn't have the luxury of time. His gut told him that as soon as the colony realized the ship was active, they would send everything they had to capture it. And him. Suddenly, an alert pinged on the console. Jack's eyes widened as a map of the surrounding area flashed on the screen. The colony's patrol drones had already started moving toward the ship. He didn't need to see the numbers to know they weren't there for a friendly chat. "Damn it," Jack muttered. His hands scrambled to activate the ship's propulsion systems, his heart sinking as each attempt returned an error. He was too slow, too green with alien technology. He had one chance, one last move. He glanced at the wolf, still standing guard at the entrance, its posture tense, its gaze fixed on the approaching threat. "You want to get out of here?" Jack asked under his breath. He didn't know why he asked. It was a rhetorical question, of course. But as he spoke, the wolf turned its head toward him, meeting his eyes with a look that was strangely knowing. The console hummed in response. Jack felt a vibration beneath his feet as the energy systems began to kick into gear, and for the first time, he dared to believe that maybe they would make it out. Then, a loud crack echoed from outside, followed by the distinctive hum of a drone's engines. Jack spun around, panic surging through his veins. The wolf growled low and deep, its muscles coiling, ready to spring. Jack could see the drone now, silhouetted against the orange sky, its sleek, metallic body glinting in the sunlight as it descended toward the ship. It was too close to the ship. The wolf moved in an instant, its body flowing like liquid, a blur of silver that rushed toward the drone. Jack's breath caught as the creature launched itself with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air. The drone was no match for the wolf's power. With a sickening crunch, the drone plummeted to the ground, sparks flying as the wolf tore it apart in a matter of seconds. But more were coming. Jack could see them, swarming from the colony like a pack of vultures. He knew the wolf couldn't fight them all off. Come on, Jack muttered, turning back to the console. His fingers danced across the controls, trying to force the ship into motion. The seconds felt like hours. The air was thick with the sound of the drone's engines, the crackling of weapons charging, and the distant howls of the wolf as it took down another drone. The ship lurched. A deep, rumbling growl filled the control room, followed by a violent jolt. Jack's stomach dropped as he gripped the console for balance. The engines had finally come online, just barely, but it was enough. "Let's go," Jack shouted, slamming his hand on the final control sequence. The ship's engines roared to life, sending a wave of power through the hull. Jack stumbled back as the ship lifted off the ground, its metallic underbelly scraping the surface of the canyon. Below, the colony's forces were swarming, but it was too late. With a final burst of speed, the ship shot into the sky, rocketing through the atmosphere. Jack exhaled, his breath ragged as he glanced at the wolf. The creature stood by the viewport, watching the retreating ground below, its expression unreadable. Jack turned back to the controls, his mind racing. They were free for now, but the hard part was only just beginning. The wolf's eyes flicked toward him again, and in that moment, Jack knew. Whatever had brought them together on this alien ship Whatever had caused the bond between them to form, it wasn't just about survival anymore. They were part of something bigger, something that neither of them could yet understand. The stars stretched out ahead of them, a vast unknown, and Jack felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. They were out there now, in the endless reaches of space, and there was no turning back.